So what I want to talk about today with you folks is organizational resiliency through a living systems lens. So if you're familiar with Integral, that's what we're talking about today. And the application is living systems is the metaphor that we always use, that we want to be more like a living system and less like machines. So let's talk about then, what are the details there? So how do we actually approach our organizations as a living system and not as a machine? But before we get there, let's just take a step back for a minute. And when we think about resiliency, what do you do for yourself to build resiliency? So I'm going to use the chat a lot, which I hope doesn't clutter it up too much, but I want to feel like we're all talking to each other, even though it's kind of a big group for us to all actually talk to each other. I will have space at the end for Q&A, but put some stuff in the chat, like what do you do to build your own personal resiliency? Empathy. Yep. A lot of us have practices, especially now, where we're building our own resiliency, and it's so important nowadays. Meditation, listening, watching Batman. Are my kids on this call? It's okay. Context awareness. Yeah, good. Wine is, also a popular one for me. Exercise, focus, breathing. And, again, awareness, and books, reading your favorite books, compassion. Yeah, these are all great things to keep yourself resilient. And then the question is, what about organizations? Organizations need to build resiliency too. So let me just take a step back and introduce myself if you don't know me. My name is Jardena. I'm a business agility transformation consultant, all those words in there. Blogger, author, speaker, entrepreneur. I've been doing this for a long time. But also importantly, I'm a mother of 3 teenagers, which if you don't need resiliency for that, I don't know what you need resiliency for. I'm super passionate about connecting soulful and practical. So I do love to say, like, here's a practical thing that we can go do, a practice, a structure. But what is the other side of that about what's soulful about it? And how can we make sure it's soulful and keeps its purpose? I will share with you in a little while. I had a recent book come out called Cultivating Transformations, and I'll share with you my website links as we get further along. But I also do have a nonprofit called Souls at Work that is about promoting this soulfulness in the workplace. So let's talk about resiliency and recovery, because I think I just want to get aligned on some definitions here. I think sometimes there's some confusion that if we can be so resilient that we'll never have to recover because we'll never do anything wrong, we'll be so resilient. But resiliency is about the capacity to withstand these difficult conditions, like the reed that bends but does not break. But you still need to recover because things will inevitably go wrong. We live in a world where things are changing all the time. So we still need to build that ability to bounce back after a setback. You can't be so resilient that nothing ever goes wrong. So you really do need both resiliency and recovery. But just for the sake of ease, and for the rest of our time together, I'll call it resiliency. So what's the impact of resiliency? Well, 2020, I think we found out in 2020 what the impact is. I think we all, the pandemic created this crisis that exposed our lack of resiliency. And I think we all ended up being resilient in ways that we didn't realize we could be, and maybe we weren't ready for. And it pushed us really hard. And it's been hard. I think we've done amazing things, and it's also been hard. Both things are true there. But the thing to realize is it created a window of opportunity for dramatic improvement that some people call in living systems punctuated equilibrium. Like, big change comes fast, and sometimes it seems like it's going to take forever, and then sometimes it happens in an instant. So we have that now. So thinking back to what we just talked about in the chat, what do you do to create resiliency for yourself as an individual? When you do that self-care, it kind of fills up your well, right? It fills your cup. It creates some reserves so that when it's difficult later, you have some resiliency reserves. We need to do the same thing for organizations. But the one thing I do really want to drive home, if I haven't already alluded to it, is a resilient group of individuals is not the same as a resilient organization. So I see a lot of organizations trying to, provide meditation apps and provide self-care for their folks. And I think that's amazing and awesome. And I encourage that fully, but it doesn't create a resilient organization. There's different things we need to care for as an organization to create that resiliency. So go ahead in the chat again, and let's maybe talk a little bit about what you see in your organization today that's showing maybe some lack of resilience in your organization or other organizations you work with, that's showing some lack of resilience, maybe where there's some opportunity for an improvement. We see it a lot in, if you look at organizations that were disrupted. Yeah, we've always done it this way, right? So that thinking, we've always done it this way, is that still happening? I feel like that's become such a mantra. I don't know if anyone says that anymore. Insistence on returning to old ways, dysfunctional teams, burnout, moving from one urgent deadline to the next, right? That it's when you're like at over capacity, there's just no way, there's no reserves, right? For resiliency. Hard to keep up with change, reactionary decision making, lost too quickly the motivation to work on something new, right? So something new comes in and then, we can see another shiny object. Heroes, specialists regarding specific topics with technology, right? That really boxes us into a corner, because if everything looks like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Lack of direction. It's my objective, not yours, or my priority, not yours too, right? Watching your back and documenting more on backup to protect yourself, right? Moving into that armored place where everything's about being protected and nothing's about being open and adaptable. Let's see, I didn't mean to skip any here. Changes for everyone else, no trust and direction from leadership, major shifts in personnel. The Great Resignation is going to be something we can talk about too. Not applying what was successful during the pandemic. Okay, let's see. So much time wasted churning. Lack of understanding to work-life balance from business leads toward IT. Oh, what needs towards IT resources. It's the constant burnout. Yeah. No time to train. Let's see, I'm going to take a couple more. No time to train, overwhelm. Example, what's the difference between Agile and Microsoft? Oh, it's overwhelmed with the amount of information and change, right? Can't tell vehicle from results. And then my priorities. Right. Good. These are great. Okay. So we know where we're lacking resiliency in organization. So let's see if we can take that and apply the living systems lens to it. So just a couple of principles here that I like to base this on, and you all came to this conference because you love integral thinking. So you may already know this, but let's just put it out there really clearly. Organizations are human systems, not machines. And I know James just talked about that in his presentation too. Human systems are living systems, and therefore, given the right conditions, living systems are resilient. So what we want to do is create that resiliency by creating the conditions for resiliency, not necessarily driving it. And if you look here, we are growing this. I know everyone on this call is already probably there with me on this, but we are growing this picture on the left here, not building this machine on the right. And the problem with machines is they do what they were designed to do. Machines or factories, they do what they were designed to do. Really hard to be adaptable and resilient because they operate within the box, and they operate really well in the box, but they can't adapt beyond that box. Or it's hard for them to adapt beyond that box. But when we create the conditions, then we can be surprised at what happens in a good way, hopefully. So just something to think about here is what we want to do is we want to stop that directing work, telling people what to do and managing that, controlling it. And what we want to do is start creating those conditions for success to happen, for organizations to flourish and thrive. So this is probably all just level setting stuff that you're already on board with. So I realize that, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page here before we get into the taking the lens and looking close at a living system. So what we're talking about is creating conditions for the organization to flourish like a garden. So using that garden metaphor, there's really three things that we need to do: plant, water, and pull weeds, right? So the planting is the building of the structures. If you were all on the previous session with James Priest, he talked about putting some of those structures in place, the connections, the competencies, the agreements he talked about, and then watering them. Right, nurturing the people, making sure people have the resources to get the work done, and then pulling weeds, obstacles, impediments, things that are getting in the way or causing some of us to fall into the downside. So that's another piece of what you do, kind of like a garden. Now, the metaphor is beautiful. People love the metaphor, just so we can talk about this. People love the metaphor of living systems because it's so vibrant. But let's get into what does it really mean? Like, how do we practically do this? So I'm going to share with you 7 conditions for living systems to flourish and thrive. It is by no means exhaustive. These are 7 starting places for you. I'm sure you can come up with 7 more, 20 more. But let's start with 7. Okay, so the first one. Living systems have boundaries. This is a good one to start because without boundaries, it's already difficult from the beginning. So starting with boundaries is super important. And if you're familiar with Margaret Wheatley, who's written a lot about organizations as living systems, she says the first act of life is to create a boundary, right? That's the membrane that has the life inside of it, that defines what's in, what's out. And when we think about modern workplaces and modern organizations, there's a lot of fluidity, but you still need to put I have it here. You still need to put your water in a glass. Otherwise it spills all over the table. So you still do need some boundary to hold things. But in living systems, boundaries are both firm and permeable. So it is firm, it is a glass. It's permeable though, because the top is open. So I know my glass is not a living system, but that's the idea here, is that we need to figure out, where is it firm? What is it? What's the identity of this living system? Not fortify it, but have it be clear, but also permeable, because that's how you exchange information with the environment. So you can adapt based on information that's coming in. You can send information out, you're sharing. So it's not completely fluid where everything's just, water on the floor, right? So you need it to be both firm and permeable. Okay, again, beautiful metaphor, but what does it mean in an organization? So some examples that you might think about are work bundles. So I know there's lots of debate about, should it be a product? Should it be a project? Should it be a program? Should it be a feature? Whatever it is, bundling things so that your work has a clear boundary of what's in, what's out, scope, right? But loose enough to be able to pivot. So it's got to be that firm and permeable balance, even with your work bundles. Software has been saying this for years when we've been saying loose coupling, high cohesion, right? I want my software to be clear of what's in my module, but also be able to talk to other modules. Same with team structures, clear team role definition. What is my job here? What am I doing? What's my role? But self-organizing enough to go and be able to communicate with outside the organization or outside the team. So let me take a pause there. Curious from you folks, where do you see places where in your organization where maybe you're too far to one side, too firm, or on the other hand, maybe too permeable? So what I see in organizations a lot is that they have so much firm and then really also too much permeable at the same time. They don't sway to like, oh, the whole thing is too permeable or the whole thing is too firm. It's like, you're both too firm and too permeable. So where do you see this? Are there any examples of places you see a misuse of boundaries? Super highly specialized silos, right? So silos can be a good thing actually, because you can deliver a unit of value from within your team. But when it's too siloed and you're not communicating outside, then it's not permeable enough. I've seen some organizations act like they own their people, right? Rigid and firm. Or too permeable, a lack of communication. And sometimes there's just so much communication that people are overwhelmed. Totally caustic, right? Way too firm and little permeability. Some organizations are completely closed. And those are the ones that we read the case studies about them getting disrupted because they didn't take in any outside information. There was no sensing. Collaboration replaced by command and control, right? Very firm. There's a chain of command. Right? There's no other communication happening. Let's see. Deconstructing the whole on, moving people around, too much moving people around. Okay. Friction between teams when we look at end to end, right? Some teams firm and some permeable. That's another thing, right? One team's inviting everybody and trying to be real permeable, and other teams are very firm. People as resources. Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity to just look and see, where do we need to firm up a boundary and where do we need to loosen it? And that's one place to start looking at your organization as a living system. Okay, let's look at number 2. Number two is living systems are collaborative. Well, again, if you're on this call, I know you love collaboration, but it's really interesting when you look, and there's this wonderful book called Finding the Mother Tree about Suzanne Simard's research on trees. Trees actually communicate, not just of the same species though, they communicate across species. Forests load balance resources. So one species may be storing a bunch of nutrients while another one then needs it. So they actually share between, she looks between trees and mushrooms and fungi and how they share resources between them. They're not competitive. They're actually working together collaboratively across species. And that is what builds resilience, because when there's abundance in one and scarcity in another species, they're actually able to share between them. Very cool. So how do we do that at work? Well, I think the first thing that we can acknowledge, especially after the pandemic and this past couple of years, is that work is the new village. If we think that work and family are separate, or work and social support are separate, they're not. Work, we spend an awful lot of our day there to not be able to rely on each other. So if we look at work as the new village and we collaborate like that, how do we do that? Because that ability to collaborate is what is creating the resiliency. So just some examples. I almost passed out at a client once when somebody offered to share their budget with somebody else, just sort of, randomly, not during budget planning or anything like that. It was just like, hey, I think what you're working on is more key to the organization than what I'm working on. So why don't I give you some of my budget and a couple of people if you want? I mean, everyone almost fainted in the room. But that kind of collaboration is important. And what he said was, if I need it later, then we'll talk about it. But for now, you need it, so you take it. I mean, where do you see that? In traditional organizations, we don't see that. And then the other piece is lending a hand, so shifting those team members. So of course, we're really good at collaborating on work, but how can we really even more share those resources and move seamlessly from areas of abundance to areas of scarcity? Okay, so the number 3 here of the 7 is living systems are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. So I know that everyone's working on DEI stuff now, so I don't want to say too much here, but that does really create so much resiliency. Forests, like I mentioned before, collaborate between species, sharing resources between species and different age. So the older trees actually share wisdom with the younger trees, believe it or not. So there's like networks of hubs with the way these trees talk to each other. It's not just every tree for itself. They're sharing information between them. So how do we do that then in organizations? Well, I think a lot of this has been said, so I don't need to repeat it here, but it does broaden that spectrum of possibility. Including everyone as valuable use of time, including and honoring everyone's contribution and mistakes, by the way. So I think it's really important to honor everybody's mistake equally, not just everyone's contribution equally. And then diversity, of course, of all types, really bring that resiliency into the fold, just like in forests where we can have all different species that sort of handle and load balance together. So same thing with organizations. Okay, number 4, living systems adapt. Well, that's the name of the game now, right? Is being able to be adaptable. And that's what is at the heart of resiliency. So of course, the classic example here is the chameleon, but there's also tree root growth, right? When a tree root grows and there's an obstruction or a rock in the way, the root grows around it. It's adaptable. It doesn't have to have a meeting. It just grows around it. And rivers too, forging a path through obstruction. So we see it in nature all the time. How do we do it as organizations? Changing strategy as conditions change. So just a couple of examples, looking for metrics that disprove our current direction. I always tell my clients, I don't want the metrics to see how well you're doing. I want the metrics to prove yourself wrong. So use those for information. Pivoting and learning is being built into the process. Sense making, inviting that contradictory idea, having that red team event so you can find out, where are we wrong? What are we missing? I'm looking in the chat here. Mistakes highlight areas for new improvements. Yes, mistakes are a great place to look to be able to be adaptable, right? I love that. All right, number 5, living systems embrace polarities. So I know this is huge in the integral community, so let's just make sure we talk about it here. Living systems love polarities. birth and death, sleep and awake, inhale, exhale, right? We can't live without any of these things. And also two dogs chewing on a rope. That's really important too. Strong and flexible, right? We need to be strong and also flexible. So when we look at, and I sometimes I call these tensions, but I saw that James had a different use of the word tension. So I switched it real quick to polarity, but you'll hear me call it tension sometimes too. So what is a polarity? Values that appear to be opposing, but that actually have an opportunity to be synergistic. But what happens in most organizations, and you may have, and I feel free to put in the chat examples of this, is when we manage them poorly and it goes into the downside, it results in this lurching back and forth. So the example I'll give you is centralize, decentralize. No, everything right now, the big push is for everything to be decentralized. Everything has to be decentralized. And then we find out we've lost so much of, we've lost so much of these, we love the economies of scale. We've lost so much economies of scale. No, let's make it centralized again. And then it's like, no, let's make it decentralized. And we just lurch back and forth without getting the big benefit of both. So when we manage them well, it can be generative. It can really create a creative productivity when we can have these two things work together. Sometimes, like, what does it make sense to decentralize? What does it make sense to centralize? And how can we have these two opposing polarities or seemingly opposing polarities working together? So I'm going to share with you, my colleagues and I put together 7 polarities that we see very commonly in organizations. There's lots of these, there's hundreds of them, but I'm going to share with you 10, and we can talk about that we think are at the root of a lot of organizations. So performance and health is one that's always being managed with metrics, right? We want to know that the organization is healthy and also that we're going where we need to go. So a friend of mine calls it the difference between your GPS and your dashboard. Like, I want to make sure my car is running well, you know, it's not overheating and all that jazz, but I also want to make sure that I'm heading to the airport if that's where I need to go, right? It's my car is running well and I'm not going anywhere, or I'm going somewhere and my tires are falling off. That neither of those things are good. We need both of those things. Leadership and followership, stability and change, I'm going to highlight as a huge one. For any kind of transformational work, we still need to have the business running for the thing that it does, that it makes its core money from, right? That's where the core revenue stream is. So stability is important. Change is also important, right? It can't be, it's not either or, we need both, and they feed each other. Structure and flow. So super important again for this group, because enough structure to create flow, enough, you know, just enough that those two things work together. It's not either or. Long-term and short-term, there's always a lot of friction when we're unclear on time horizon. So being really clear about what's long-term and what's short-term, how they feed each other. And we talked about exploitation, innovation, internal, external, parts and whole, centralized, decentralized, we just talked about. And we'll get to spawn and shed. We're going to talk about that a lot in just a minute. But there is, you know, we do want to grow things, but in organizations, we love spawning. Shedding, we don't like so much. So we're going to talk about shedding. So I'm just going to take a pause there and see, you know, go ahead and put in the chat if any of those jump out to you. I see, oh, you've added some too. Quality and delivery, great. Is there any of these that jump out at you as a particular polarity that maybe your organization is struggling with right now? Because again, they can cause lurching. Structure and flow can cause lurching, but it can also work together really beautifully. Exploitation and innovation. Ambidextry, right? Okay, good. So exploitation and innovation. I would love another word for exploitation, but what I mean there is that we're harvesting what we've grown, right? We're harvesting, but we're also innovating. And they should feed each other. There's a feedback loop that we need between those two. Internal and external for community involvement, right? So internal and external, I feel it's so important. There's a lot of talk now about, oh, focus on the customer. I think it's great to focus on the customer, but also we have to know who we are. And in terms of the boundary, that's key too. So be really clear how we know who we are, and then also take some feedback and input from the external. Thank you, Jesse. You like harvesting better than exploitation. Okay, maybe I'll switch it. Okay. All right, so going back to our seven elements here, number 6 is living systems release energy. So this was what I mentioned before when I was talking about the spawn and shed. So organizations, in my experience, really love spawning and don't really like this releasing or shedding of energy. But if you think about a forest fire, releases energy, allows sunlight in, reuses that energy as puts it back into the soil. Dead plants, dead animals create fertile soil. So that energy and those nutrients go back in to create that new life and make space for it as well. So in terms of the forest fire, like you're letting more sunlight in because some of the trees are burning down, allowing for some new growth underneath on the forest floor. But organizations, oh, we really don't like that, do we? We never want to get rid of anything. So yeah, set up for conservation. That's right. So wait, what does this mean? RTB versus CTB. Tell me what that stands for in the chat. Yeah, so a lot of times it's like, keep the, see how you can build on that thing that we have instead of throwing it out. We never want to throw anything away in organizations. But if you think about how releasing enables resiliency, it gives you space, it gives you energy for something else. We love hoarding. So asking the question, why are we doing this? Why are we still doing this? Not being afraid to kill projects. And I get this all the time where it's, oh, the ship has sailed, the train's left the station, we can't stop, we've already started. But if it's not serving anymore, stop building on faulty foundations. Technology people in the group will know about these old systems that we're really afraid to get rid of because like, well, what if there's something in there that we don't know, or we invested all this time and money into this system, so we have to figure out how to continue building on it rather than just scrapping it and restarting. And then obsolete teams that have found a way to justify their own existence when they really don't need to be existing anymore. Maybe it's more valuable to work on something else. It's hard to say no to people. I'm looking at the chat here. AS400, yeah, still running, right? Some of that code's still running. We waste so much on old systems and we are afraid. There's some fear there for sure, but also there's this sense of like, well, we invested in it. So, we have to keep it and figure out what to do with it when maybe it's just cheaper and more efficient to rewrite it. Oh, and okay, so yes, thank you for posting that link, Devin. It's the adaptive cycle, right? So it's that birth and then maturity, and then there's the releasing before you can reinvent. So a lot of companies are looking to reinvent, but they haven't released their old garbage yet. They haven't taken out the garbage. Cut the dried leaves off. I love it. Kill projects. Never heard of that. Okay, let's see. Death March projects, the big why. Yeah. So all of these, I think, one place to look, and when I talk about living systems, this releasing is so important because just nothing new can grow when we have a bunch of garbage. And here's a bunch of garbage for number 7. Excuse me. So number 7, what is hampering for living systems? Well, living systems are hampered by pain. Think about if you have pain in your body, it's really hard to think about anything else. Toxins, right? If there's toxins in the system, it's really hard for that system to flourish and thrive. It's hard to be resilient, not impossible, but hard to be resilient when you have a toxic system. An invasive species is another one, right? You get invaded by some, there's a whole bunch of them happening right now, right? You get invaded by, we have them here, the lanternfly, right? By some species that's not native. And it really does hurt that living system. It's killing our trees. Inhibiting structure. So you paved over your garden, right? That's the inhibiting structure example. So how are we doing that I'm just watching the chat. You guys are so funny here. So how do we do that in organizations? So this picture, if you haven't seen it, I'll send you the link, is from a Pixar film, a short Pixar 7-minute film, I think it is, about these dull workplaces. So that's what the picture there is. So when organizations are inhibited and paved over, just like living systems, they lose their resiliency. So fear is one. Toxic cultures that don't speak up, that loses its resiliency. We lose information. We lose our ability to hear. Bureaucracy is basically like pavement for an organization. Processes that define this narrow path and that you can only walk on this one path. And there's just no ability to sense anymore. You lose your ability to sense. And then dull work. So when we talk about dull work, and that's why I have the picture here, you know, people think that that's just part of life. That's what work is supposed to be. It's supposed to be dull. It doesn't have to be dull. So organizations thrive when people are excited about coming and not having to just kind of punch the clock and then leave and get their paycheck. So I think we should really abolish dull work and find ways. Of course, we already find ways to make it automated, right? But find ways to make it interesting. Why does it have to be dull? There's no reason. Okay, let's see. I'm just looking at some things here. Okay. In the what you have here in the chat. So just a couple of things about pain. I mentioned that's something that can hamper a living system. And sorry for the picture there. It's fake. You can tell it's ink, but I think it's really telling because it's impossible for a living system to flourish when there's acute pain. So look in your organizations for places where there's pain and attend to that first. Sometimes I think we solve the problems we can solve instead of solving the problems we should solve. And if there's pain, if you're attending to a team that's enthusiastic and happy instead of the team that's in pain because it's like easy win, maybe you need to give some time and attention to the pain, to where that pain is in the organization. Because if one group is in pain in the organization, the whole group is in pain. The whole organization's in pain. So we do need to take a look at that. And I'll take away the picture of the blood and just be able to look that pain squarely in the eye, even if you don't know how to solve it. The problem is that sometimes we don't know how to solve it. So we say, let's go solve some things that we have some tools for. But just sit there, just sit with that pain and say, let's figure it out because it's hurting us. Okay. Just seeing what you're all putting in the chat here. You're guessing I'm an extrovert. That's so funny. Oh, because I want to feel like we're talking to each other, right? No, I'm an introvert, actually. Funny that you say that. But you know, I don't talk to myself. So so 7 elements that we just talked about for organizational resiliency that we can get from living systems: firm and permeable boundaries. We talked about collaboration, even, you know, across groups. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is so key. Adaptiveness, of course, we all want that. But embracing those polarities is key to looking for where we might be lurching. And then don't be afraid to release energy, because that just makes room for more energy to come in. And then, of course, looking at places where there's hampering and getting rid of that. That's the pulling the weeds piece, getting rid of things that are hampering, getting rid of toxins, getting rid of pain in the organization. And I'll just give you one word here. I'll give you a free download afterwards, but I just want to plant this seed with you. Living systems are really at the heart of it, fueled by the soul, fueled by all of our souls. And I know I said a group of resilient people doesn't make a resilient organization, but a group of soulful people does make a soulful organization. So looking for places where we can make sure that we're bringing soulfulness in. And again, people always ask me, do you mean religion? I don't mean religion. I just mean letting people be who they are and bringing like what our true passions are and feeling like we can bring our souls with us. So I have this 5-step process, which I'll give you a download. I'm not going to go through it with you now, but just looking at some of the things that are happening in your organization and reassessing them, reassessing some of the processes, some of the interactions that are at play and saying, can we make this more soulful? Budget planning. Can we make budget planning more soulful? Why are we doing this in the first place? And why does it suck so much? And what would it take to make it not suck? Performance reviews is another traditionally soulless process. Can we make it more soulful? So I'll give you a paper about this if you want to read more about the 5 steps. But I think when we talk about living systems, you know, at the heart of it all, at the soul of it all is soulfulness. So I'm going to pause for a few minutes here. Stay in touch with me, LinkedIn. I post a lot on LinkedIn. I do have the book Cultivating Transformations, which you can go check out as well, which will be available in audio like any minute now. We're working on uploading it. It's all recorded and ready to go. So any minute now you can hear my voice for 5 hours if that's what you want. But it will be available on, you know, in Amazon and everywhere else, and also in Spanish very soon. So please stay in touch with me. And I'm going to take a few minutes now just to hear. I know we've been communicating through the chat the whole time, but I would love to take any questions that you have. And I also have a couple of downloads that I'll share after the Q&A. You can go to my website and get a couple of things.
I've also included your link to your book and your website on the mural board, so you can just double click on those. And also, as I added, you could add your takeaways to the circle here from this session as well. So
great. So any questions for me or comments even? I know we have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I actually have one question. Hi, I'm Lee. You had a call out about metrics and about how they should be kind of pointing out, where we could be doing better, not just saying this is what we're doing right. And I wholeheartedly agree. I believe it was Scott who posted in the chat. He said something that I thought right out when I saw it was, that's not always welcomed in organizations. They want metrics to prove we're going in the right direction. What insights or advice do you have there that we can kind of frame up? Well, this is how we want to find metrics and this is how we want to present it.
Yeah, I love this topic. Metrics are a big passion of mine. Thank you for the question. The problem is that historically, here, I'm going to turn off this screen so I can see your faces. The problem is that historically we've used metrics to prove ourselves right. And what I hear from executives a lot is, boy, when I see all the metrics and I get all the status from everyone, I think everything's rosy. But when I look at my P&L, it doesn't match what I'm hearing in the status meetings. So why is that? Because we don't have, when you have metrics to prove yourself right, and we call them vanity metrics, it doesn't give you the information that you need to be successful. It just makes you feel good and worthy, right? But what we want is metrics that can help us pivot, that can help us navigate through change. So that's where I think that is the key when we say like our metrics haven't been serving us. What metrics would better serve us can get you to the point where you're using them. And I say it kind of tongue in cheek when I say I want it to prove you wrong, right? But that might not be something that's welcomed in the culture, especially if there's fear. But maybe you can just start with how can they better serve us to adapt. What is it? Oh, where it's not safe to be wrong. So Devin says where it's not safe to be wrong, no metric will solve for that. Right. That's true. Right. So I think Deming says when there's fear, you will never get correct numbers.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Oh, okay. Let me see. There's something. Let's see. Okay. I'm trying to scroll back here to get them all. Okay, Jesse, what are some traits of individual resilience as a way to contrast with these 7 collective resilience traits? So let's take a look. The 7 traits, I'm going to flip back here. I'll share my screen in a second. I just have to get to the right spot. So if we look at them, they all apply to both organizations and individuals, Jesse. Let's see, I'm going to share the screen up here. If you think about boundaries, right? That's one, we talk about boundaries all the time with your interactions with other people, right? Where what's okay, what's not okay. But you also want it to be permeable because you want to be out, you want to be interacting with other people, like letting good stuff in. Collaboration, diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that speaks for itself. Jesse, do you want to say more there about your question?
I was just curious because there's a distinction between individual hold-ons and collective hold-ons. And as you were going through this, I was thinking through the collectivist perspective around organizations and teams. But what's interesting here is that you are pointing out indeed that these are all traits of healthy individuals.
They are, but applied differently.
There's something cross-cutting about resiliency as being a trait of healthy individuals and healthy groups as well.
Yeah, but applied, I think the thing to remember is applied differently, because remember my beginning statement there was, my beginning assertion was a group of resilient individuals does not create a resilient organization. So because people practice these, you still need to practice them at the org level too. But I think the things are similar.
Perhaps that's the key takeaway, is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, if I were to use a cliche.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. This is great stuff. Thank you, Jardena.
You're welcome. All right. I know we have
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a question. I can?
Yeah, Yep. Cool.
Okay, here is Shmuel. I want to ask you what, according to you, impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on all this subject of organizational resiliency in the firms, in other organizations?
Yeah, so I think that the impact of the pandemic, is that what you're asking? How is that impacted? I think organizations that were resilient did really well. I think organizations that weren't, some of them quickly learned how to be resilient, but it hurt, right? It hurt and people are burned out. So if you look at the organizations that weren't resilient at all and like sort of figured it out, people are burned out there. So people what they did was they sort of amped up their rigidity. They amped up their fortification to get through it rather than pull back and become adaptive. So that's where you see a lot of the burnout in organizations I work with, where they said, in order to get through this, we're going to like buckle down and, really, work hard and be even more rigid, put more stuff in place, rather than the ones who said, okay, we have some structures for adaptability, let's lean into them. That makes sense. All right, I see in the chat, is my hampering the same as Deming's tampering? I am a fan of Deming, but I don't know his tampering definition, so I can't answer that. But maybe I did know that and forgot, because that happens. Let's see what else. How do you interact with the C-suite to start looking at their organization as a living, breathing entity? People, like some of the pictures I showed with the fish and the coral reef, people love living systems because I think inside of us, we are living systems. So starting to use the analogies before you start to use the implementation, I think works really well because people just respond to it. Starting to use the metaphors and some of the language, and then you can sort of lean into more of how do we apply and just layering it on. We're already living systems. You don't have to switch anything. You're already a living system. So you don't have to change anything. You just have to start to lean into that a little bit more and a little bit less into the machine metaphor. Okay.
You asked for a couple of comments, and I just want to say excellent connection and made it real sticky and memorable. The work is the new village, huge, and know yourself or know your firm, and then be customer focused was also a great takeaway. I appreciated those.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me know that. That's good. I like to hear what resonates. And resonance is another thing about living systems. We didn't get to that one today, but being able to be resonant throughout the system is a very living systems things where I think sometimes we're a little dissonant in the machine, in the way we work as machines. Okay, let's see. Yeah, we could do a whole talk on resonance. And when I started researching what that really means in science and nature, I was like, wow, that is what we're missing, right? Because it really is that you're operating in the same, in sort of that same energy frequency. It's really cool. And when you're not, it breaks. Okay. Okay, there's one more I think we have time for, and then I think I'm going to be cut off, right? In some cases, I feel afraid to connect myself, talking more and behaving aligned with my heart and not just my mind. Well, because we have such a culture of machines in corporations today. Create awareness in leaders. Okay, so this is very similar to the C-suite question. Yeah, I mean, I think just starting with the metaphor is the way to go. And I found that people resonate with that. Okay, I think I covered most of them. I'm sorry if I missed one, but I think I got it all. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm so happy to hear that this is, I'm reading the chat at the same time. Devin is so funny. But I'm so glad that this resonates with you all. Oh, and I did have, oh, sorry, Milan, let me just share with them some of the links here, which we will also put in the, we'll put in the mural, but just so you have it. A couple of things. There's a paper I wrote with some colleagues on structural agility that incorporates a lot of this. It has the tensions in there with a lot more on the tensions. So free download there. And then on my homepage of my website is the 5 steps to soul, like I promised you. And then there's a paper on what is Agile really, like the 8 hallmarks of agility. So you can take a look at that as well while you're on there. And then go check out the book, Cultivating Transformations. Thank you all so much for your time today.